On today's episode, we'll be talking about how agencies lose clients. We'll cover the common mistakes that drive clients away, the factors that are out of your control, and what you can do to strengthen relationships and reduce the risk of churn.
Pretty excited to dive into this. We got a lot of different examples, and we'll kind of look back on some of the ways that we've lost clients while operating our agency. But yeah, first and foremost, just wanted to note, why is it, so important for agencies to not lose their clients? So, we talk about client retention a lot, and maybe you could kind of frame it from the perspective of agency growth and profitability. So, maybe you could shed some light on that.
Feel like it might be self-explanatory for you need clients around to make money, but even if you're a project-based business, you want to retain your client at least through the project that you're working on. If you're a retainer-based business where you rely on clients to continue to work with you over a long period of time, it's important to have that client around and kind of make sure that you're not reliant on having to go out and find business every single month. So I think, client retention is really important in that baseline to continue to add upon every single month or period of time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, client acquisition can get pretty expensive if you have to do it over and over again. And one image that I think we've talked about with our agencies is this concept of a leaky bucket. So, you fill it up with new clients, but then, if there's a hole where you're churning clients out, no matter how much you fill up, it never quite gets higher. The level of water in the bucket never gets quite high because of that leak. And so, growth really comes from retaining clients.
And the reality is there will always be some aspect of churn, right, for a variety of reasons. But it's making sure that's minimal and the top of the funnel, filling the bucket, is larger than the amount leaking out of the bottom.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So let's dive into some reasons. I'll start with how agencies lose clients. And number one thing is, just this idea of not setting expectations well and not communicating it well. So, I think part of it, we talk about it on the onboarding side of things. A client signs engagement and they're supposed to get things going, but then the agency drops the ball. They don't give the client a heads up on what's coming. Don't have things buttoned up in terms of schedule, the kind of steps that you need to take. Yeah. Can you speak to that? Where do agencies lose clients when it comes to onboarding?
I think this is kind of under the bucket of account management or project management also, but it's all about setting clear expectations on what's to come and always being one step ahead of what the client's next question is going to be. So onboarding is obviously the first step of a relationship, and really just establishing when are we kicking off, who do we need from their team, what's the project schedule, and really aligning and being clear upfront on what to expect. Because you could erode trust right at the beginning before even beginning any actual work on a project.
Yeah, I mean, there's a painful story that comes to mind. We actually had a client once. We had done some really good projects with them on the web side of things. We had sold them on doing some paid marketing work, but for whatever reason, we weren't buttoned up about getting account access right. Our team was kind of fumbling on these steps to kind of get the right access, get ourselves set up to do the work. And there was delays that took a couple of weeks. And so at that point, the client was like, hey, this is not working. I needed this last week and you guys still don't have access to my account. So I'm going to stay with my current agency. So that was a very unfortunate moment where just a simple thing like onboarding, you think we have it, in place, but because we fumbled that one, we lost the opportunity there.
And for an account like that, even if we just told them it would be 2 weeks, it's going to take 2 weeks to get the account ready. That information up front would have been helpful to manage their expectations on what's to come.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do a couple rapid fire ones. Maybe you can speak to some of these. How about missed deadlines?
Once you're in a project and working on it, it's all about, again, expectations and whether you're delivering to what you promised that you would. So if you miss a deadline, consistently you're late, missing meetings or, whatever it is, all of those, erode the trust with the client.
Yeah. So what can we do to kind of mitigate that?
Yeah, setting realistic deadlines. So oftentimes that might be lack of communication with the internal team on when we can actually deliver something, and setting, internally, what are the steps that we need to check in daily, every few days, in order to, by the time the deadline comes around, nothing is a surprise. And also, even if you know you're going to miss a deadline, just being upfront with the client and say, hey, we actually need another couple days, so let's move that meeting that we have scheduled.
Yeah, that proactive communication is so key to at least making things right. The next one is poor quality control. So what can we say about poor quality control?
I think it's again, things are done, they're rushed, and there are mistakes, whether it's in design, coding, like if there's just a lack of polish, there are errors, there are bugs, those are the things that clients recognize. And even if you're upfront about, hey, this is not in a polished state, here's what you should expect to see here. Generally, when things aren't polished or are in a presentable state, it's really, it feels like things just aren't buttoned up at the agency.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've had so many frustrating moments around quality control over the years in various capacities. And I think some of that was, hey, like we're on a tight deadline and had to show the client something on a certain date without prompting them and letting them know. I think that's caused a lot of issues in the past. Even after, let's say, a client has reviewed it, but they've left a lot of notes and kind of not addressing the quality issues that they thought were important and coming back with a revised version that maybe doesn't address all the things that they thought were important. I think that also caused issues. What are some ways, in terms of quality control that we've done to help improve the way that, the projects ultimately turn out?
Quality control, and it starts much earlier in terms of aligning on like what is it that you're making and delivering at a certain period of time, having the internal checkpoints so that there are many eyes on things before they're presented, being clear about, I guess one example is, let's say you're making a website and you tell the client, hey, we're going to share these 10 pages at our next meeting. Let's say the team is feeling strapped, so they hastily put together 10 pages. It's almost better to focus on here 3 to 5 pages that are really polished and complete, versus trying to do too much at once and everything isn't, polished at all. So I think it's, again, just being clear. This is project management of like, what are we promising? What are we delivering? And making sure that what we're putting out is of a high quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, another way that agencies lose clients, I say, is unresponsive account management, just maybe poor communication to some degree. This one is a big one. You can speak to some of the examples here.
This is the feeling that I think it's a line that clients sense a lack of account management before they sense a lack, a lack of quality in the work. So what that means is, if the client is not hearing from you, so let's say like a team is busy, heads down working on something, and you're not proactively updating them on what's going on, it almost feels like they're being ignored or undervalued in a way. But also, if when a client emails or calls, being quick to respond, I think that's really important from a account management standpoint, so that if client feels like they're a top priority.
Another way that agencies lose clients, I say, is unresponsive account management, just maybe poor communication to some degree. This one is a big one. You can speak to some of the examples here.
This is the feeling that I think it's a line that clients sense a lack of account management before they sense a lack, a lack of quality in the work. So what that means is, if the client is not hearing from you, so let's say like a team is busy, heads down working on something, and you're not proactively updating them on what's going on, it almost feels like they're being ignored or undervalued in a way. When a client emails or calls, being quick to respond, I think that's really important from a account management standpoint, so that if client feels like they're a top priority.
The interesting thing is, from the agency's perspective, they can think that everything is going well with this client. Maybe like, hey, the quality of the work is good, or like, hey, we're hitting all the deadlines. But by not being communicative, by kind of assuming that things are all good and not checking in and, having a regular channel of communication, that can actually put the relationship at risk. So I think that's something that sometimes gets overlooked because it's very easy to assume things are going well, but it's actually why some of the things that we really encourage is even like a basic quarterly business review check-in with a client, or, even some kind of email check-in with them every once in a while, is so much better than just going radio silent.
Yeah, and the other thing around that is being proactive about understanding the state of the client's business. Your project might be going great, but on a macro level, the client, the company could be doing not great. If you haven't had that conversation and been transparent and proactive about that, it could be a surprise. Hey, we lost a client. Things are going so well. Why did it happen? But the signs were there all along.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one is something we've felt firsthand several times. So this is the idea of like a new stakeholder coming in to, on the client side. In the beginning, they're friendly, they say nice things, but we're kind of on edge because they probably have another agency that they prefer and is looking to replace your agency. So yeah, maybe we can talk about how we've lost clients this way.
Yeah, I mean, this has happened a lot over the years. I think the thing that we've kind of learned in these situations is that is a pivotal moment in a relationship when a new stakeholder comes in. I think for us, it's almost treating it like this is a whole new, you got to win the client again. So all the effort that you put in, early on in biz dev to inform the client on who you are, your experience, what you're working on. It's almost like a re-onboarding of this new person that has absolutely no idea who you are. You can put your best foot forward and try to present yourself in the best light, but at the end of the day, the reality could be they have the partner that they've worked with for 10 years and they want to, their goal is to replace you. Like there's not much you can do about that.
Yeah, you almost want to, just as much as you want to win it and stay on, we've also just kind of been like, okay, the time is ticking. This relationship will probably end. We should also make sure our business development efforts are taking that into account to replace this account that's probably going to churn. So I think that's the other, internal clock that starts running once a new stakeholder comes in.
Yeah, definitely. And also, you want to make it a smooth process also, because the person who comes in could also be an advocate for you for the future for whatever, new engagement, new company
Sure.
that they end up going to.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it goes both ways. Like new stakeholder could be an opportunity for you to make, another connection that helps your business grow. Next one, I mean, I'm big on this because I think it also applies to just people you hire within the company and the relationships within the team. But this idea of like misaligned tone or communication style. One thing I want to highlight is like the speed of comms is important in terms of the communication style. So maybe you could speak to this a little bit.
Tone is an interesting one because it's hard to read tone in an email or written form. So generally speaking, if it's something that could be challenging, we might recommend just picking up the phone, doing a Zoom call, and just having verbal communication when tone could be misunderstood. The style is actually, yeah, a big one where everyone has a different style. Some people are text people, some people are email people, some people are in person, and we've had all kinds of clients throughout the years. One big thing, speed is important, regardless of the format, just making sure that you're mirroring the pace of communication. If it's text, it's, responding quickly and just showing that you're on top of whatever it is, because it could be a very important thing to a client to get a response quickly for whatever question that they have.
I think it's on the agency to really kind of feel out from the beginning whether, hey, this is a client that is very fast with comms and expects fast responses. Because the moment there's a mismatch, let's say the client's used to like, same day responses or whatever it is, maybe a couple hours is like the max. And then the agency is more used to, hey, next business day when we get to it. That's going to create instant, erosion of trust, like in a big way. Recognizing that, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you need to have a polished answer ready to go for the client, but just acknowledging receipt and setting the expectation of, hey, we'll follow up with a more detailed response in X hours or tomorrow. That can handle it, but you just need to make sure you're reciprocating in a way that makes the client feel good. I know this comes up a lot because it's like when clients feel frustration or express that, hey, this seems kind of slow or just they don't care about me or whatever it is. It's a lot of times it has to do with the speed of comms, which is like, it's crazy. It's not a heavy lift, honestly, but like it's something that we've learned the hard way too. Like, when you have a PM that's a little slow to get back to clients or something, or an account manager that's taking their sweet time getting back to a client, it can create a lot of problems. some people are on the fence about this, but I think, having a texting relationship with clients, sometimes, that could be one way to kind of make sure there's a direct line to that client.
Yeah, various clients. We've developed a lot of good personal relationships that way also, because you just end up talking about things outside of the specific projects.
Maybe another way that agencies have lost clients, ego and defensiveness, especially if you're on the creative side, maybe even on the tech side too. Yeah, maybe you could talk about kind of instances where, this has been a way to lose a client.
This is an interesting one. Usually this comes when clients have some sort of feedback on the work output, or it could have been a small mistake, but how you handle that sets the tone for the relationship. Like if you put up a front saying no, like you're defensive and you say, no, that didn't happen, or you come with a position of ego, like, no, like you're wrong, we're right. That type of dynamic, it sets the tone where clients don't like being on the receiving end of that. It's all about delivery, right? You could disagree with what the client is saying, but if you communicate that in a respectful tone, explain where you're coming from and the background, and they can make the decision whether they agree with you or not. But it's more about that perception of how they feel from your communication.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the course of a relationship, there's also, just kind of understanding that you don't need to fight all the battles. You don't need to be right. You need to kind of feel out, what the client's trying to achieve and be supportive in that path. And I think just kind of having low ego, but, high standards for yourself and what you're delivering and the service that you're delivering. I think it is the service mindset that I think sometimes, if you're a craftsman of the work and you really take pride in what you do, I think sometimes you can kind of forget that. And I think it's very important to kind of be grounded in humility, and as well as making sure at the end of the day, the clients are paying for this.
Yeah, and then I think really being open-minded, just trying to understand where everyone's coming from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. The next one is like about cost creep without justification. So agencies sometimes, if they haven't done a good job of setting this up for clients, that like, hey, there's expanded scope or whatever, that surprise invoice is gonna not land well. So maybe you could talk about some instances where, we've made some mistakes on this end.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is established at the beginning of the relationship, understanding, here's the scope. If there are change orders that increase the scope for a variety of reasons, just being clear on what's in or out of scope. I think that's, step one to prevent any surprises on, what's happening. I think part of it is understanding from a client's end. They probably had to go through a process to get budget for this engagement. And, if they were to go over budget, that reflects poorly on them in some instances, or they have to go back through a whole system to get more budget approved, which could cause some friction. So both of those situations where if they just don't know and it's a surprise, you never want to be in a position where that keeps happening. Over time, if you have many little changes, it could feel like you're nickel and diming them, where a small project could balloon into a larger project and they feel like they've just been, misled from the beginning.
Yeah, 100%. Part of this is we have to train our teams over the years on how to have these kinds of conversations. The tight scope is the foundation of it, because then you can be like, hey, we talked about delivering this, but from our discussions, it seems like you really want this thing that was not defined in our scope together. And so for that, this is what it would cost additionally. Do you really want this or not? And I think just having that discussion and giving the choice diffuses a lot of the challenges that could happen, because we've been in situations where, for example, project manager maybe is the scope isn't the tightest, but also they're, more of the people pleaser type perhaps. And the client's like, hey, we want this. And the PM might go, okay, that sounds good. They do it. And then later it's like, here's the increase in the invoice because we did what you told us to do. And, when the client gets hit with that, they get incredibly mad about it because they're like, hey, you never told me. And so I think just part of it is that training that you need on how to manage scope really tightly. And, I think a lot of times if you do it right, clients are more than willing to pay for something that they see as added value. And so it's going to be very important on that regard. How about, and this kind of related in terms of the work and scope, perceived lack of value? Because I think agencies get fired for this a lot. Sometimes, clients spend a lot of money on something and they're like, wait a second, this isn't really driving the results I thought. Why am I spending so much on this? So maybe you could speak a little to examples of this.
Yeah, this has come into play typically for kind of like ongoing or like retainer type relationships. Like for a project, they've budgeted, they kind of have like a sense of what value they're trying to get out of an engagement. But if they're paying monthly for some kind of outcome, and it's not clear, it's on the agency to approve what is the value that offering to your business. If it's not clear and it just feels like an expense versus an investment that will yield them positive outcome on their business, that's an easy thing for a client to just cut that expense.
More specifically, I think we used to, let's say, charge 100 hours a month of web support and adjustments or whatever. And a lot of times clients will use some, but not all the hours. We try to make up things to try to, be like, hey, you need to update or make this page look better, or, try to freshen this up, swap out this imagery. Sometimes we didn't tie that to kind of, hey, this increases conversion rates, and so it led to more leads or allowed you to close more deals or whatever it is. So without those results that our efforts were tied to, I think some clients after time, they're like, hey, I'm paying you guys, tens of thousands of dollars a quarter for this, and I don't know what I'm paying for. That's an easy way for them to perceive lack of value and cut the agency.
Definitely. And even in situations like that, where let's say you sold in 100 hours a month and you're only using half of it, it may be wise to just say, hey, let's reduce the scope to half the scope of what we've originally signed on for. And that can lead to a longer time horizon to working with a client versus going from 100 to 0.
Yeah. Speaking of which, the next one, the reason agencies lose clients is rigid pricing model. What can we say about this particular reason?
Yeah, so that's one example that we just talked about where, if you're fixated on the specific amount where it's a hourly model where we have to charge you 100 hours a month, and that's the only way you'll do it, clients will say, hey, that doesn't work for us. Let's move on. Another thing is when, there's so many different pricing situations where clients may need to backload, front load their budgets depending on how their fiscal year kind of occurs. So, just being flexible with how you work with clients, just understanding how things work on their end as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is more new business related, so maybe it's not about client loss, but it was a lost deal nonetheless. So an example was, remember we had this big media brand come to us and they're like, hey, really need help on this landing page or whatever it was. And at the time, I think our kind of floor for a landing page with those kinds of features was like 25,000. And they're like, hey, we have $18,000. Can you guys do it? And for whatever reason, we were like, nah, like this is below our line. We're not going to do it. And so we passed. Lo and behold, another agency that we know ended up doing that initial site and then ended up getting many, many projects after that probably added up to more than 7 figures worth of work. And so it's just kind of funny thinking back on like, hey, rigid pricing model, and it wasn't, we probably could have made it work for 18K, honestly, but we were just super rigid about that. Another reason clients might ditch an agency is an M&A event. So we could talk about both sides because we've seen it happen both ways. So let's talk first about a client getting acquired by a larger company. So what can we say about that?
Yeah, that's a similar situation to when a new stakeholder comes in to your client, where company gets acquired. And you may need to, sign new MSAs with a larger organization, basically re-sign all your contracts, and you're essentially proving your value to the larger company that acquires you. So that is kind of more potential for loss there, especially if the larger company also has preferred vendors that they work with that, they want to just consolidate with some of the other companies that they work with.
We've had this happen a few times with like some really cool brands that we work with where, we brought them on, let's say to Shopify and like, created some really cool work only to, see that company be absorbed by a much larger company who had a different tech stack. And all of a sudden, all that work we did, the previous year just kind of flushed out because they were like, hey, we got to integrate with this bigger system. And, Shopify is not going to factor into that. And so we were immediately cut out and the client just kind of goes. That's always a risk. Let's talk about the flip side when the agency experiences M&A event.
I was going to actually talk about the flip side of the company gets acquired and then you can sell into all the other companies at the larger company. That's the opposite of losing a client, but turning
You
it
could
into a
gain.
bigger
No, no, true,
opportunity.
true. If you're like a
Yeah, yeah.
superstar, vendor, and like you come in and then it's like they start spreading you. So it could be a good business development opportunity where they're like, all right, we work with these guys. They're fantastic. You guys should use them in other, for your other needs. And I think, yeah, that's a way that we've grown accounts in the past as well.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, from an agency getting acquired, if you yourself are getting acquired and are working with the client, sometimes that's just an opportunity for the client to revisit contracts and determine whether or not they want to continue. Depends on how your contracts are written in that case. Just making sure you want transferability as much as possible so that clients don't have to re-sign if the agency gets acquired. But that's definitely a moment where it can cause one of your clients to reconsider their relationship.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this firsthand in a very stark way. When we announced that we had acquired an agency, we saw right away a client was like, "Hey, I know what happens when agencies get acquired. I've seen this happen in the private equity side. Like, service is going to suffer. So you know what? I'm putting my notice right now." It's like we didn't even have a chance to show that the business is going to continue, but like for whatever reason, they just thought this was going to be bad news, and so they just took the step to churn.
Yeah, and there's probably signs before before with the relationship that led to these specific incidents. But yeah, I think in those cases, again, it's like reiterating your services, and in some cases, just trying to show that there's going to be as little impact as possible to their existing yeah projects. Yep.
Okay. And then let's talk about market conditions as another reason. So this is a little bit, outside of control of the agency, but it does definitely happen. So what are some things here, and what can the agency do to actually still keep the client?
Yeah, we saw this kind of recently in a few different waves, like when funding for e-commerce businesses dried up quite a bit. A lot of our clients who were relying on the next round of funding to buy inventory to, continue their business, they weren't able to raise the money and make those investments. So they had to reduce spend on marketing because both they didn't have product to sell, but they also need to find opportunities to scale back. In those cases, either you could be as accommodating as possible, just in general, to think about, can you service that client at a lower revenue level for yourself? Can you also see, maybe you can pause services saying, hey, this might be a temporary thing. Let's pause for 3 months and let's pick things up later on. So you're trying not to lose that relationship or make it just completely disappear, but find a way to continue working together in a different capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'd call out, just like as just something for agencies to be careful about, is when market conditions go down, it's very important to make sure from a receivables like invoicing and cash payment collection perspective, you try not to let the client fall behind. Because I think one of the challenges is if you're accommodating, you have a great relationship, you're accommodating, you do a lot of work, but then you start to see that they haven't paid their bills. That puts the agency in a very dangerous spot because the client can run up quite a balance with the agency. And look, if the market conditions are bad, who knows how long it'll take for them to pay back that amount. And in some cases, we've had situations where the client doesn't pay, they default on the payment, and you're kind of left holding the bag.
Yeah, it's yeah, definitely continue to receive the money even if you are being flexible with other terms.
Yeah. And that honestly, that could be a point at which you do let it churn, because if the client's like, hey, we can't pay, okay, like you probably should not do work for them. Okay. So we got a couple more left. This one, oh man, I have a very specific example here, but it's another agency offers a more compelling value prop. So yeah, we talked to this particular reason.
This can happen in a lot of different ways where, you're working with a client, someone else comes along, say, we can do this very like niche specific thing, better than your current agency, or we can undercut their pricing, or, we can do these other services like, or we have better creative than what you're getting currently. So there are a lot of like, just because you have a client doesn't mean people can be trying to steal that client away from you.
Yeah, and I think agencies need to realize that like clients are getting hit up by other agencies all the time. Just like I'm sure like employees are getting hit up by recruiters and whatnot. Like it's the clients are getting hit up by other agencies to work with them. So like at any given moment, if they're unhappy with your agency and, there's some doubt in the agency's ability to do something, like dozens of other agencies that have been knocking on their doors and like, at any point they're liable to kind of move on or entertain combos with other agencies. So you just have to assume that like you got to show up every day and prove yourself. I remember this particular example, where one of our clients, their CEO, went away to some kind of leadership retreat or whatever and was talking to another entrepreneur CEO there. And like, the other CEO recommended his own agency and was like, hey, they are really good at XYZ stuff, solving this particular e-com thing. And lo and behold, like we have been working with this brand, but then next thing we know, like this other agency's in the code with us and we're like, what the hell's going on? And like, these things happen. I think we were able to fend off and kind of keep that relationship in the end. But wow, that was like a stressful moment.
Yeah, you never know when things are going to come in from all sides, different stakeholders, different reasons, or different like aspects of the project or an engagement that like you're not even touching, where you might be kind of working with other agencies on those cases.
I mean, we've gone through a ton of things, and I'm sure there's some stuff that we've also left out. But we'll wrap up with this last one, which is the in-house resourcing, which clients sometimes do when they're working with an agency. Maybe the cost goes up to a level where they think they can bring some of these full-time resources in-house. Can you speak to the in-house part of why agencies lose clients?
Yeah, I think so. Typically, a client hired a really competent person who managed, product teams in the past. So engineers, creative, project managers, who was initially managing our teams, and they had, a pretty sizable retainer with our team. And over time, they realized, there's certain roles that we could hire internally. And instead of paying an external agency to do it, we can hire that resource directly and manage them. And then over time, one role became two, three, four, and then suddenly they've replaced all the team members that have been working on that account. It's usually cost driven when a team wants to bring things in house, or if there's some specific aspect of like things that they want to control, maybe like they're building up a big tech team in house and they want to make sure everything is integrated and they can manage everyone internally.
If you're purely kind of staff or kind of like a model where you're kind of selling manpower to clients, you're at more risk sometimes. One way to mitigate this is to really have certain responsibilities, specialty areas that maybe the client's like, hey, there's no way we're going to hire full time for this. It's just too focused. And being able to provide that, maybe let's say if it's a group of devs or designers or QA people that the client has hired, for their in-house team, you can still have like, let's say a CRO expert, maybe like a more solutions architect type of person, somebody who's like high level DevOps kind of stuff that can be fractionally, still assigned to the client and the client will be happy to pay for those resources. So it just goes to show like, hey, like you gotta continue to kind of feel at the client's needs and make sure you can provide something that's extra valuable. Well, we've covered a bunch, so important to retain your clients and everything we said about how agencies lose, just think about it, do your best to retain your clients because that's the sure way for your agency to grow. All right, till next time. Thank you.
Thanks.